to another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show, and I couldn't be more excited for the guest I have today, Darryl Cooper. Of course, I guess I really don't need to read your bio. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this show has seen you on one of the mega podcasts, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, but you also host your own show, the MartyrMade podcast. You're the co-host of The Unraveling with Jocko Willink. And this is a new project of yours. You're the co-host of Provoked with Scott Horton, who, of course, is a frequent guest on this show and somebody I'm very close with. So, Darryl, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Of course, man. Yeah, I'm excited about it myself. Like I told you off air, I've read your work, enjoyed your interviews with Scott for a long time. So it's a long time coming. Looking forward to it.
And just want to remind people that you are on Substat, substat.com/@MartyrMade. Definitely follow Darryl's work there. You get some interesting insights from him through his Substat that I don't think you necessarily share on like the shorter form of ads or in your podcast. So that's definitely worth checking out. A lot of topics I want to talk to you about today, mostly surrounding what's happened in the Middle East over the past few weeks. You were on Tom Woods. I found that interview very enlightening. So I want to get some of your thoughts on that and maybe ask you some follow-up questions essentially. But, who won the war, the role of missile and air defense, the shift in public opinion, what you were posting about today on X, and of course, general topic of understanding the enemy. So I guess to start off, Darryl, just to ask generally, do you have an opinion yet? Are you still thinking about it on really what side got the best of the other in what Trump has dubbed the 12-day war?
Yeah, I think when you have a war that ends short of one army occupying the other side's capital, a lot of it comes down. You can sort of figure out who won the war just by watching the responses to it in the respective countries. And look, you still have people to this day who will insist to you that the 2006 war against Hezbollah in Lebanon wasn't an Israeli loss. It was a victory because they killed more people, they destroyed more things, and so forth. Having traveled Israel extensively in my capacity as a DoD civilian engineer working on air and ballistic missile defense systems for a long time, I spent a lot of time over there, and most of my friends who live in Israel are MOD or IDF veterans that I worked with back then. They all knew. They knew that was a lost war, and it was it was sort of a central event in their, at least when I was traveling over there, like in their understanding of their geopolitical situation. And when you look at this one, you have to think, what are the goals of each side, right? The Israeli side, I think the sad truth of it is that I don't think they really had much of a goal. And the war kind of took on a life of its own when their initial push to try to flip the government in Iran didn't work out. If you look at the strategy that they employed, they I think it came out recently that before and immediately after they began their surprise attack, they were calling senior Iranian generals and government officials and warning them that if they didn't make a recording denouncing the government and announcing their surrender and so forth, that they were going to target and kill their families. And when you see something like that, it's obviously years in the making. This is not something like the Israelis really shot their shot on this one. All the assets they had embedded in Iran, just the whole thing is something that, again, they burned assets that took years to put in place. And so the goal, I think, initially was to get the government of Iran to collapse pretty much overnight by employing the strategy that I mentioned. And when that didn't happen, I think it became obvious very quickly that Netanyahu did not really have a plan. And so they just started expanding the bombings, hitting other things, but when the Iranians kind of hunkered down and started firing back, you saw there was no exit strategy. There was no real there were no victory conditions that were really established for the Israelis at that point. And I tend to think, and this is partly just, from analysis of the news, but it's also from talking to people like Tucker Carlson and others who are closer with the White House than I am. I really think that, well, let me preface this by saying, like, I was one of the people who, when it became clear that we were going to start dropping bombs over there, I was as angry as everybody else. I kind of kept my mouth shut first because I wanted to see how it played out, but I was really upset. Looking on it in hindsight, I do think Trump was sort of watching the situation unfold and seeing that the Israelis had bitten off more than they could chew, and that the only thing that was going to happen if this went on another week or another month or another 6 months was just that both sides were going to lob missiles into each other's neighborhoods and get more people killed, more things destroyed. And that was about it, because neither side could really accomplish anything permanent that they could impose on the other. And so, Trump picked something, destroying the nuclear plants, that could be framed as like, all right, we did what we came to do, and that was our victory. But you could see like the fact that they came out and insisted right away that everything was destroyed, no possible way that even a scrap of a centrifuge could possibly be left. We destroyed everything. They came out and pushed that like long, long, long before it was remotely possible to know any of that information. I mean, I've sat in on DoD battle damage assessment meetings before, and those reports take weeks to formulate and approve and everything. So nobody knew, but that's okay. I mean, like for me anyway, like it's okay. Like, yes, definitely. We destroyed everything. We won. It's great. It's over. If that ends things, then that's good. But look at it from the Iranians and the Israelis' perspective. Like the Iranians, they took some damage for sure. But they took on the empire and they're still standing. And they talked shit on their way out. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm supposed to curse on here, but they were still talking smack on their way out of the classroom. You know what I mean? Like, they may have gotten smacked around a little bit, but they never bucked, they never buckled under. And to them, that's a massive victory. And, I think talking to other people in the region, you'll see that it's viewed in the region as a massive Iranian victory. If you look at it from the Israeli perspective, they burned all these assets that put years to put in place. They took a lot of damage that Israelis have never experienced before. And they found out that as hard as they can hit, Iran can take a punch. And they're not just going to, flop over and have the government collapse because you huff and puff a little bit. I mean, if you're looking for reasons to be optimistic, I think it lies in that. Now the Iranians know that the Israelis hit really hard and they have a big brother who can hit even harder. Mm-hmm. If they had any doubt about that, now they know. But the Israelis know too that if you want to fight, there's going to be a real fight. And one thing I could tell you about Israeli people, at least just the friends that I know, and again, these are mostly MOD and IDF veterans that I worked with. That's how I knew them. They don't have the appetite for a war that's coming to their own city and their own neighborhood. They just don't. Like if one comes to them and they have to fight it, that's fine. But there's a lot of people over there now who are very upset with Netanyahu for jumping into this adventure with no clear exit strategy and no plan,
Yeah. So I do want to play this clip from Donald Trump that I just thought was very interesting that an American president would say something like this. So let's roll this clip.
I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, they've got a country, and they've got oil, and they're very smart people, and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings.
So, I find this clip interesting, especially after just listening to your analysis, because in a way, it seems like almost the Trump version of this. In a way, everybody kind of could feel victorious at the same time, is a little bit on edge. But I was really surprised to hear an American president admit that Israel got hit hard. And I wondered, who Trump was maybe giving this message to. And I just wanted your thoughts on this take.
Well, who knows? Like Trump's messaging is so erratic that it's hard to know if there's an actual plan half the time. But I mean, he's aware. He's at least aware, as somebody who prides himself on being a top-notch negotiator and all that, that for anything to be really settled for any amount of time in any kind of a stable way, all the parties involved. Well, unless one party is utterly defeated, then all the parties have to be able to go away and feel like they can walk away with their head held high a little bit. When that's not the case, after World War I with Germany, for example, after the 67 war with Egypt that led to 73, you're pretty much just signing a brief ceasefire until they can get their act together and try to get some of their pride back. And so Trump, I think, is aware of that at least, and he knows that it's actually better for everybody and better for the prospects of peace in the region if the Iranians can come away with this and feel like they didn't get humiliated. And so he may be talking a little bit to the Israeli people and government too, though, saying that sending the message to them that like, look, I let you shoot your shot. You dropped this on me while I was in the middle of negotiations, but I agreed to let you go ahead and do it. You've been planning it for years. Everything was in place. Iran is as weak as it's ever going to be. Syria's gone. Hezbollah's decimated. Hamas is scrambling. They're as weak as they're ever going to be. Shoot your shot and go for it. And they did, and it didn't work out. And Trump then had to come bail Netanyahu out. And I think as erratic as his messaging is, because it really is like hard to pinpoint his opinion on like pretty much any of these issues from day to day or hour to hour. But I do think that, he was sending a message like specifically to Netanyahu. Like he wanted Netanyahu to know that he was getting bailed out, that it was Trump's decision to go in there and save his ass. And, I almost think that we waited to do the bombing until the time that we did it, so that it would become clear to everybody in power over in Israel, including Netanyahu, that that's what was going on. If you remember back to the second day of the war, it was, you log on to X in the morning, you turn on TV and you see, pro-Israel or Israeli commentators. Their whole line was telling people, just let Israel cook. Don't worry about it. Nobody's asking the Americans to do anything. Before they were even halfway through that sentence, the whole narrative shifted that day, that afternoon was the Americans have to come in and do something. Americans have to get involved. Official Israeli government request for Americans to get involved is because it only took 24 hours after that initial attempt to overthrow the government didn't work for them to realize, oh no, we don't know how to get out of this. Politically, we can't surrender. Right. Neither can they, and we can't make them stop shooting these missiles at us. And so, I think, Trump, give him credit for some things and criticize him for others. But one of them is that sometimes he's just brutally honest about things that other American political figures would never say, whether it's this or saying that America, we aren't angels either, things like that. Sometimes things slip out that, give you a little bit of background and insight into what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's what made a lot of people like Trump, is that you do get those kind of candid moments and takes. Now, I want to ask you about the situation with air defense, missile defense. I know, professionally you did some work with that. And this is really interesting to me. I remember 5-6 years ago when Saudi Arabia, who had multiple Patriot batteries, was really struggling to stop the Houthis, who I believe were firing mostly homemade drones and converted Scud missiles. So nothing, I'm sure, quite nearly as advanced as what the Iranians have. And in this conflict, Israel is saying they shot down or either diverted 90% of Iranian incoming missiles. And so, I'm wondering, has missile defense just gotten that much better, or is it mostly like electronic warfare going on here? What do you think accounts for Israel's ability to do what has to be incredibly difficult, right? You're hitting a missile with a missile. These things are traveling at hundreds, thousands of miles an hour. It has to be incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah. So first thing to lay out is that air defense and ballistic missile defense are very different things. They use similar equipment, very, very different challenges though. Mm-hmm. And so when the Israelis say 90%, I'm assuming that what they mean is they shot down 90% of all incoming targets, which includes drones and things like that. If they're saying they shot down 90% of the ballistic missiles, I don't believe them. I know what their systems can do. I've worked on the THAAD system. I've worked on their systems with them, throughout the 2010s. And I worked on for 20 years, the most advanced air and ballistic missile defense systems that the U.S. makes, including the brand new Aegis system that just rolled off the line a couple years ago. And look, the reality is this: shooting down drones, shooting down aircraft, things like that, are systems that we have now. Not even that we have, the systems that most advanced countries have. They're really good at that. They're really, really good at that. And to shoot down anything short of a stealth aircraft, and even there, if you were to fly that thing around one of Russia's S-400 units or around, one of our SPY-6 Aegis units, the pilot would be white knuckling it for sure. But anything beyond that, when you start talking about ballistic missiles, they're different enough in function and their demands on the system. Up until the brand new Aegis system just rolled out, it's on one platform only so far. We had to have separate ships dedicated to each mission. One would be scanning the horizon and the air domain for aircraft and incoming cruise missiles, things like that. And then we would have other ships that were just completely dedicated to ballistic missile defense. And the way that works is where with air defense, you're scanning the horizon and you're scanning the dome out to whatever, the range of your radar is at all times. And maybe it'll take you, say, 3 seconds, 2 seconds to scan the horizon, and you just keep doing it because low flying, threats are going to sneak up on you more quickly. So you want a really quick up to date on that. And you might scan the whole rest of the sky. It might take 30 seconds or a minute or something like that. With ballistic missile defense, what we do is we have a ship basically construct a box up in the sky, and it devotes all of its radar resources just to that little box that we construct. It's a 3D, imaginary box up there. And we have gotten better at shooting down ballistic missiles over the years. You remember a few years back, there was a satellite that was going to come crashing down. We used that as an opportunity to test it out. And we shot that down successfully. But the problem is like the radars can do their jobs. It's actually the missiles that are the real limitation, because you have a projectile coming in, a ballistic missile coming in so fast that it actually, unless you get what we call a skin to skin hit, a missile on missile actual contact, because normally with an aircraft, like all you're trying to do is explode near it, and the shrapnel blows holes in the airframe, and then the thing spins off and is destroyed. Ballistic missiles, unless you get that skin to skin contact, the missile that's coming at us is actually traveling faster than the explosion itself of our missile. And so the shrapnel can't run down unless you hit it. And so that's extremely difficult to do. Even if you're shooting at a drone or just like an airliner, and you get a skin to skin hit, that's like a hooray for us kind of thing. It's difficult for our systems to do. Just the radar resolution and other things that are required to do that are tough. So here's an example. Like when we do a ballistic missile interception test, we might put a ship out on the missile range off of Kauai, and then what we'll do is we will have everything planned out down to the 10-second mark of, we know when it's being fired, we know where it's coming from, we know where it's going, and we place our ship or our asset in exactly the right place to have the best possible shot at this thing. And even then, we all crack open bottles of champagne when we get a kill. Like, it's not certain, right? The systems are amazing. They're amazing systems, don't get me wrong. But everybody who actually works in ballistic missile defense will tell you, if they're being honest, if you get a couple beers in them, they will tell you that the attacker always has the advantage, and they probably always will. Not just because it's much cheaper to be the attacker, but because everybody basically knows the capabilities of each other's systems. They might not know exactly how many engagements we can handle at once. That's classified, but they know theirs handles X, and if they assume we're a little better, they have an idea of what we can do. And so they know, for example, that you can only handle just, say, 7 engagements at any given time. It's just a random number I'm pulling out. Don't come prosecute me, DOD. Say 7 engagements that we can handle at one time. And so all they have to do is fire 7, drones with no warheads or anything else on them that cost them $1,500 a piece, take up our engagement queue, and then launch some ballistic missiles behind it. And everybody kind of knows that. They know how to saturate the system. They know how to overload it and overwhelm it. And I mean, that's kind of what we saw, like, especially as the war started to drag on, you saw the Iranians start to adapt their tactics to the Israeli systems, where, they were sending in a bunch of dud missiles or cheap drones to come in first. And then all of a sudden you'd see a hypersonic or one of their other ballistic missiles just come crashing down, or a few of them behind it. So they were adapting and learning on the fly too. The real difficulty with it, though, is, when you got to figure, when we like a standard doctrine, I assume this is similar with the Israelis. Still, it was back then. Like, if we have an incoming incoming missile that's coming at our ship, or one of a target that we're defending, when we see it, when it comes in range, we fire off 2 interceptor missiles at it. Usually, before they even have a chance to make contact or not, we fire 2 more to come up right behind it. So right there, you're talking about 4 missiles for every incoming 1 missile. And you really start to burn through your interceptors really fast at that rate. I really think one of the reasons that that we all of a sudden became really hot under the collar to get this thing stopped is that we had our Aegis ships over there and our Patriot batteries over there that were helping defend Israel from all this. But if you think about like a destroyer, which is our main missile defense platform, those and cruisers, you've got maybe, like, depending on what their loadout is, because you have the vertical launch system, which, we launch our Tomahawks out of that. We have some torpedoes even that we launch up, and they go out and land in the water and then go off. And then we have our standard missiles and our extended range missiles and stuff. Standard missiles are the interceptors we use. So you have 128 cells, let's say, on the VLS system, carry 128 missiles, but not all of those are interceptors, and not all of those are interceptors that can actually do the thing that you want it to do. And so you might have 40 or 50 of those things. And when you start to get into a real defense fight, you burn through those things really fast. And to reload them, it's not like you just hit a button and the magazine drops out and you pop another one in there. You got to go back to one of just a handful of bases that we have in the U.S. and a couple around the world, where they have magazines with these missiles in them. And it's a multi-day, hard hats, cranes, like everything operation to reload these launchers. I mean, it's a big deal. And so if this thing were to continue to go on, and Israel was already running low on interceptors, that I can tell you for a fact. If our ships were starting to run low as well, which they were, we were either going to have to change our entire force posture around the planet, start pulling resources, ships from other places, other missions to come do this, or we were going to have to surge a bunch of sailors who weren't planning on going on deployment yet and send them over there to do this. And so, and even then, that's kind of an indefinite thing, because again, you hear that Iran, we estimate they have 2,000 to 3,000 ballistic missiles or so. It's like, A, we don't know that. B, they have a lot of other stuff they can shoot to saturate up, or to take up our interceptors, soak those up. And it was just starting to look like a long-term war of attrition that, yeah, with total commitment, we could probably win. But it was starting to look like it was going to take something like total commitment. Nobody was prepared for that.
Yeah, and so this is exactly where I wanted to take the conversation, which is essentially the fallout from all this. And I remember reports back to the Biden administration where, when we are waging this war against the Houthis, the American ships only have a certain number of interceptors in the Red Sea, and it takes time to go and, put more interceptors on the ships. And so they're really relying on, I believe they're called CRAM systems, basically the chain guns, to fire at and take down the Houthi missiles. But of course, there's some risk involved in that, because it's the last line of defense system. And if you don't take it out, then, you could get very close or hit on an American ship. Throughout the 12-day war with Israel there, we had the Americans shooting down Iranian missiles with aircraft. We had the THAAD, the Aegis Ashore, or the Aegis system, the SM-6 missiles, the Patriot missiles, as well as the Israeli Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David Sling, and Iron Dome. And within 5 days of this war starting, I counted 5 different sources reporting that Israel was running short on interceptors, particularly their Arrow 3, which I think intercepts the missiles at like the highest possible altitude. But even the Iron Dome, which is their basic one, they only had like 2 weeks worth left there. I read a report in Forbes that said we used at least 39 THAAD interceptors to defend Israel during that time. And then one of the CENTCOM generals said that the engagement to defend the American the Al Udeid base in Qatar, after Iran told us we were going to fire on it, still required the largest Patriot missile battle in American history to defeat that attack. And then we get this report. I wrote this up for Judge Knapp. The Pentagon is halting some arms transfers to Ukraine as U.S. stockpiles shrink. And they do mention that a part of these are the air defenses. My guess is that they're Patriots just because of how far the U.S. has had to go already to get Patriot missiles to Ukraine. But do you see this having global implications, and particularly implications for Ukraine if we're burning through all of our interceptors defending Israel in the Middle East?
I mean, in many ways, and for sure. I mean, look, there's a faction within the administration, but just DOD and defense security bureaucracy in general, that for a long time, that whole pivot to Asia thing that Obama tried to, initiate, that wasn't like just some idea he came up with when he woke up one morning. This has been like a strong push from a certain faction within our government for a long time. And they sort of have looked at it as before we can do that, we need to get things at least stabilized and sorted out in the Middle East. And there have been two sort of competing factions as far as how we're supposed to do that. One you saw with Obama and Ben Rhodes and all his people, which is we got to cut a deal with Iran and sort of welcome them back in to the global system. And the JCPOA was like the result of that. And that obviously did not make the other faction happy. The other faction, they want our traditional alliance structure of Saudi, UAE, Egypt, Israel, Jordan. We just need to empower them as much as possible so that they have the collective power, the collective strength to control the region more or less on their own. And if things like really get completely out of hand, maybe we get dragged back in, but they can basically handle things and scare off anybody else from starting fights. What you see now, I mean, is that, it hasn't like this fight has really kind of shown the people in the U.S. Security bureaucracy that you're never gonna just completely get your allies to establish complete hegemony over the Middle Eastern region. It's just not gonna happen. I mean, even Israel can't do it, and for us to just constantly be there as an active participant in conflicts like this, when we do have other commitments around the world, it's just not a long-term sustainable. And so, I mean, look. It may, you talk about Ukraine. I mean, it may come around that the fact that we used up so many of our missiles in Ukraine or in the Israeli conflict, and now Ukraine is running short and we're canceling orders on them. Maybe it'll bring that war to a conclusion sooner than it otherwise would have. So that would be, a good unintended side effect, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, look, people have for 2 years out of my 20 years that I was working in air and ballistic missile defense, I got asked to set up our centralized procurement department for the installation where I worked. And so I got to know the DoD procurement process very, very well. And it is as nightmarish as the worst you've ever read, and 10 times more. It's just a labyrinthine, just complete it was a disaster. Like, it's just the way we procurement. I just mean like, the way we buy everything from pens to Patriot missiles. And so the production lines under normal peacetime conditions, which is all conditions, since World War II, like the last time we went into wartime production really was World War II. Under peacetime conditions, I mean, we roll off maybe like a couple dozen missiles a year, and that's if we're rolling like full speed and we're not. And like, if you're using up, 4-6 interceptor missiles, every ballistic missile that's coming in, and 40 a night are coming in. I mean, you just can't keep up. You just can't. And, right. And the thing is, like, again, you don't know what that blip on your radar is until it actually lands and explodes or doesn't. And so we have to fire those missiles, whether or not that thing has a warhead on it, whether or not that thing's going to reach its target or land in the desert or whatever. We still got to shoot our interceptors at it because you just don't know. And, it becomes very expensive. And just at a certain point, just from an industrial procurement standpoint, becomes impossible. We just can't do it. And we've sort of seen, I think, our rivals around the world, or at least the countries that I'm told are supposed to be my rivals and enemies. They've taken notice of this, and they've seen how little it really takes to kind of overwhelm the best air defense systems in the world, and to overwhelm our ability to keep them stocked, for future days of conflict. So it's a lot of countries that have learned a lot of lessons. Hopefully, we're one of them. Hopefully, Israel's one of them. Hopefully, Iran's one of them.
Right. Well, I want to ask you this question, Nats. I saw this actually on your ads feed today, a clip discussing the public opinion relating to Israel and how Americans feel about Israel. So let's play this clip for the audience.
Andrew Cuomo, during the primary, attacked Mamdani as being insufficiently pro-Israel. I'm not quite sure the former governor understood how much the politics have changed around this issue among Democrats. What are we talking about here? All right, who Democrats sympathize more with, Israelis or Palestinians? In 2017, the Democratic Party was a pro-Israeli party. Look at this. They sympathized with the Israelis by 13 points, more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. But look at this sea change. Now Democrats sympathize more with the Palestinians by 43 points. Oh, my God, that is a change in the margin of 56 points over the course of just 8 years. So all of a sudden, it's the pro-Palestinian position that actually reigns supreme in Democratic politics, not the Israeli position. And that is part of the reason why Mamdani was able to do so well in this primary, because those attacks over Israel, simply put, did not ring true for Democrats. They're now on the side of the Palestinians, not the Israelis. So take a look here. Who age 18 to 49 Democrats sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Again, in 2017, younger Democrats sympathized more with the Israelis by 14 points. Look at this shift now. Palestinians, they sympathize more with the Palestinians by 57 points. That is an over 70-point shift in the margin in just a matter of 8 years. The bottom line is the politics around the Israelis and the Palestinians have shifted tremendously among Democrats, and they've shifted specifically tremendously among Democrats who are under the age of 50.
Well, I think for those of us who would like to see the special relationship with Israel end, this certainly seems to be good news. I think this is something that's also reflected among young Republicans too, maybe not to the same degree, but certainly there's a far more nuanced and balanced breakdown, between Republicans who support Israel, or at least who don't want to support Israel, maybe not as much support the Palestinians. And so what do you think are the implications of this massive political shift?
I want to say that I'm encouraged by it, but at the same time, I hope it doesn't drive Israel to take drastic measures, knowing that, they've got maybe only a few years left once the boomers really start to take their leave of the planet, that they might not have the unconditional American support that they've really come to, and it's the unconditional part of it that really is important. It doesn't matter if America is still their friend and, and all that kind of stuff. Without our total unconditional support, Israel, they can't continue to behave the way that they behaved for the last several decades. And, that's one way that I really think that, you think it's like if you have an alcoholic friend or something, and he's shaking and he's sick and everything, and you give him some whiskey and he feels better, and you feel like you've done something good, but you haven't. And with Israel, by coming in and telling them, do whatever you want, we have your back no matter what, it's really caused them to behave in ways that they would not have otherwise. It's caused them to be more belligerent, more aggressive, less willing to compromise with their neighbors than they might otherwise have been. In fact, I think without our unconditional stamp, there's a good chance that the Israelis would have made some kind of peace with their neighbors quite a long time ago, but they just haven't had to. We've all known a person who, or certainly I have, two brothers, and the big brother is a tough guy and nobody wants to mess with him, but he's a sweetheart. He's a nice guy. And the little brother who follows him around all the time is just a nightmare, standing behind his brother, talking smack to everybody else around. And, it's sort of a mentality that gets taken on almost naturally, And, I think that, look, Americans, like the Israelis, we're kind of there's like a deep contradiction in the American mind and spirit. Like on one hand, we're very like open-hearted and humane people, like we just are. Our concern for like nobody does more for tsunami victims and all those other kind of things than Americans always have, and those are not like just the government doing that. I think if you were to poll people, should we have helped the tsunami victims in Indonesia in 2004? It's like 95% of Americans would have said yes. The budget hawks would have, anybody. And that's who we are. At the same time, what country is causing more destruction and death and everything around the world than the United States? And so, and we excuse that to ourselves, and we make sort of rationalizations that attempt to square that circle for us. But at bottom, look, I think I was in like 7th grade, maybe 8th grade. It was middle school when they had us watch Schindler's List at school, which I think is probably a weird thing to show to kids that are 12 or 13 years old. But, most people have that experience. And if you go throughout your life, your education and just exposure to media and political statements and so forth, we have been taught, largely by Jews, by the way, in the U.S., Jewish authors, movie directors, Jewish leaders in general, that, when this thing happened back in the 1940s in Germany and Eastern Europe and so forth, the Germans carried it out. But look at all the people who just didn't speak up. Look at all the people who saw what was happening there and didn't open their mouth and just looked past it or made excuses for it. And we've been told our whole lives that was a moral failing, second only to, the killing itself, and that we must never do that again. And so when we see stuff like this, it comes back to haunt us in a way that, like, the same thing happened in the Vietnam War. You could convince people like we're fighting the Soviets and we're trying to hold off this war machine that's controlled by Stalin or whatever else. But after a while, you can only see so many images of like our bombers taking out people with cone hats on in like a paddy field and little girls running around naked before Americans they don't want to do it anymore. And you can, if you try to use all of the old, like pre-internet, pre-social media tactics to shut down dissent when it comes to something like this, as the pro-Zionist lobby and their sort of fellow travelers have, you're going to lose that battle, and you're going to make yourself into the bad guy with Americans. We see it, and at the end of the day, you can only look. At the end of the day, you can't get past the basic fact, which is that only one side of this conflict has an air force. Only one side of this conflict has really anything beyond an AK-47 to fight the other side with, maybe some flying pipe bombs or something. And when you have situations where, no rockets have been fired out of Gaza into Israel since April. And for some time before that, it was pretty rare because, the place is destroyed and Hamas is scattered around and everything's ruined. And so when you read like daily, another massacre at a food distribution site, another massacre in this neighborhood of just hundreds, 50, 100 Palestinians killed again and again and again every day. And all that the Israelis and their boosters in the U.S. really have to counter that is that they're all fake, all of them. And all of the people who were there as witnesses, the people from the aid organizations, from the UN, from the journal, they're all liars. And, you can do that once. You can do it twice, but eventually people start to look at you and realize what's going on. And Americans just have started to do that. And, I think with Republicans, that's like a dam that's waiting to break, because it's similar to how, back when Trump in the 2016 primary, when he was in South Carolina, and he denounced the Iraq war, said it was based on lies and all that kind of stuff. Republicans, conservatives in general, they breathed like a sigh of relief when that happened, because before that, if you wanted to denounce the Iraq war, that meant you had to agree with Nancy Pelosi. It meant you had to agree with these people who you hated, and they hate you, and you disagree on everything else. And it means letting them win that debate and sort of handing that to them. But when one of your guys comes out and says it, it's like, oh, finally we have permission to say that this Iraq war was a disaster and we never should have done it. And I think very similarly, and you see this in the tactics that a lot of the Israel boosters are using on social media. They have different tactics they use on different political groups, and on Republicans and conservatives, what they say is, look at these campus protesters. These are the same people. That's BLM. All these people who are pro-Palestine, that's BLM, that's Antifa. And if you want to criticize the Israelis, you're standing shoulder to shoulder with all those people you hate and who hate you. And so a lot of conservatives and Republicans are, they're watching what's going on. It makes them a little uncomfortable, but they just feel the need to sort of defend it because they don't want to clan up with these people they've been trained to hate. And once that starts to break, though, once you start to get to a point where, and you're starting to see it, I mean, there's a reason they're as upset with Tucker as they are. When you start to have like mainstream voices starting to tell you, no, it's okay to watch what's unfolding here and think it's wrong. I mean, it's, in fact, you're selling a certain part, an important part of your soul if you don't do that. And once that starts to happen, I think you're going to see a big change on the right too. And
Yep.
From an Israeli standpoint, again, like, you have to understand, like, the big Israeli fear, the strategic fear of like the Zionist project, is not that Hamas or Hezbollah or any combination of their enemies is going to overrun Israel and occupy Tel Aviv and, depose the government and kill all the Jews. Their great fear, and I had some of my Israeli military buddies tell me this after the 2006 war, their big fear was that once that sheen of invincibility, of military invincibility evaporates, once that's no longer there, even if everybody knows that in an extended war they could still win and they can count on the US and all that, anything short of just this mythical 1967 Six-Day War, just total domination of their enemies, it makes the Israeli people feel vulnerable. And, before any of this even started, Israel was already having trouble. They were bleeding a lot of people, moving to the US, moving to England, moving to other places. And, I know a lot of Israeli Americans who they're pro-Israel and everything. They just don't want to live there, And, the great fear is that if that idea of invincibility starts to drop away, then, maybe that person whose cousin has a job waiting for him in New York, maybe they just decide to finally say yes to it. And then once that starts to happen, the demographics start to tilt, and then it becomes just this self-reinforcing kind of accelerating thing. And, the project collapses basically under its own weight and in a sort of do-it-yourself way. That's really the big fear, and it's one of the reasons that you see so many Zionists, commentators and journalists and so forth, putting out this message to diaspora Jews of just how unsafe they are in the world and how overwhelmingly threatening the rest of the world is to them, and that they have to move to Israel because, as the American Jewish Council said in an ad last year, strange thing for the American Jewish Council to say, but they said that Israel is the only country in the world where Jews can be safe. Hell of a thing for, again, the American Jewish Council to say, but from a Zionist point of view, I mean, they really kind of rely on that. If you look back throughout the course of Jewish history, one of the things I've always found very interesting is that the three big flare-ups of like Jewish, militant Jewish nationalism, for lack of a better term, nationalism is obviously like a modern configuration, but you go back to the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucids, you go to the revolt against the Romans that led to the destruction of Jerusalem, and then the Zionist project in more recent years. All three of those did not come at a time when the Jews were just around the world being oppressed in an unprecedented way, that things were worse than ever, and out of desperation, they revolted against the Romans, or desperation, they decided to go to Palestine. All three of those, very interestingly, happened at a time when, the previous two were in Hellenistic and Roman times, and then after Jewish emancipation in Europe in the 19th century, where Jews were starting to assimilate. They were starting to leave the fold and like go out, and you had the leaders of the community looking around and saying, we've got to find some way to hold these people together because they're out marrying, they're forgetting their religion, they're just leaving the community. And it's when the world is more open to them that those big rebellions have happened. And so, in a way, Zionism and anti-Semitism like really need each other. And if you want to talk about like the risks, I mean, the real risk is that, and I would say this goes for the right and the left, but the real risk is that is something that a lot of anti-Zionist Jews, which were most Jews in the United States up until at least 1929, probably till 33. They were always afraid that if you go down there and you create this thing that's calling itself the Jewish state, it's going to do things that states do. It's going to kill people. It's going to put people in prison. It's going to do all the things that states do. And we Jews here back in the diaspora, people are going to look at us and say, what is this state that's calling itself the Jewish state? What is going on? They're going to pin that on us. It's going to reflect on us, the behavior of this state. And that's why they were anti-Zionist. I mean, it's even why, like, right there in like the Balfour Declaration, like this was sort of even mentioned, and I think that that is sort of that's the risk. That's something you don't want to see happen, and something that you have seen happen. I mean, everybody who goes on to X, go log on for a few minutes, and it's all it'll take. Like you'll see some people who are not drawing a distinction between Benjamin Netanyahu and the Jewish accountant who lives down the hall from them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all Jews and they're all part of the other side, and we have to relate to them and somewhere along the spectrum of hostility. That is something that I don't think any reasonable people want to see happen. And so I've been arguing against that very firmly, even as I criticize Israel very strongly. Is just keeping in mind that Israel is a country. It's got a government. It's got military, intelligence agencies, all these kind of things. And Jews are just people, and that's it. Yep. And so, it's important, and and that can get lost. I mean, that can get lost, and you see people that are kind of losing that thread. So we have to be careful of that.
Well, that's why I think your voice is one of the most important right now, just because you are able to talk about these issues and, empathize with both sides, but at the same time, make it clear that there's a difference between people and governments, and there are some governments doing horrible things. But that's the time we have for today. Darryl, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been a fan of your work quite some time, and it's a real honor to have you on and talk with you today. And maybe we'll do it again in the future. I know you're working on a pretty big series right now, World War II from the German side. And of course, we'd love your take on all that and more in the future. So we'll have to do it again, Darryl. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.